Welcome. Tonight we have D.A. Roberts, a writer with he's got many books out there. And first of all, we want to welcome you, D.A. Roberts. Thank you for coming on the show. And
thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, this is incredible to have you on.
Absolutely.
Speaking on tonight's topic is going to be the apex predator, Wolf Moon, written by D.A. Roberts, about the Dogman. And we're going to look into, is there some reality to this, or is it just purely fictional? And we're going to take a deep dive looking into this topic with DA. He's an expert on it. And take it away, DA. Let the listeners know where they can find your works, your books, and such.
Okay, not a problem. My name's D.A. Roberts. I'm an author. I write primarily fiction and horror. You can find all of my work at daroberts.net. You can also find me on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, where most books are sold. I write a wide variety of series. I've got one series that's a zombie series. I've got 4 series currently that deal with cryptids. And I've got 2 sci-fi series as well, and I'm working on a fantasy series. But I've been investigating cryptids since I was a little kid back in the 70s. First got into Bigfoot after seeing the Patterson-Gimlin film, and my uncle, who married my mother's sister, he was full-blood Cherokee, taught me a lot about Native American lore, and it really kind of piqued my interest about, what's kind of just behind the curtain, so to speak. And digging more into stories where people would report seeing Wolfman and a wolf-like creature, than what they more in modern times called Dogman. Digging into that, I've discovered that it goes back far farther than people realize.
Yeah, for sure, all the way back to the Egyptian god. They had a dog-headed god. I believe that's Anubis, right?
Yeah, with the head of a jackal, I believe, right?
They actually had 2. Anubis is the jackal-headed god, and there was a wolf-headed god, was Anubis's brother. His name was Wepwawet. They were both dealt with the underworld.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And it's also in our mainstream history. Like Alexander the Great spoke about seeing a dog-headed tribe, but in massive numbers. And they also even say Augustine, Christopher Columbus, Marco Polo, and all these different explorers. They all at different times encounter these creatures, and they all have the same description, like of how they'll have their own culture. They all behave their certain way. They all cook their food like on rocks. I guess they call them the cynocephali. Is that what it was?
Yeah, the cynocephali.
Yeah.
Where we get the term cynocephali, which it basically means having the head of a dog. But the term cynocephali comes from the term cynocephalus, which was coined by the Greeks and the Romans, who both spoke of fighting dog-headed warriors in their travels in North Africa and India.
Oh wow! So there's a lot of like a lot of these people are very well respected, and they talk about these dog-headed these beings, and even Alexander the Great said in his writings that he caught 2 of them, and he described how they're behaving. They're vicious, they bark at you apparently, but they can't talk, but they use sign language, the cynocephalus or the cynocephali, so that they could understand the language. I'm guessing, but they couldn't speak it back. They can just kind of bark and growl and use sign language. And
that's weird.
And a lot of them were in India, apparently, from what I've read.
Well, any of the canid species, their mouth and their throat is not set up for vocal communication other than howls and barks. They don't possess vocal cords as we do, and of course their mouth isn't designed to shape words. So it would be completely out of character for anything that possessed the head of a dog to be able to make sounds as we do. But even in more modern times, the Catholic Saint Christopher is known as the dog-headed saint. In Catholic iconography, you can find pictures of Saint Christopher with the head of a dog.
Yeah, I was watching a documentary on that today. It's very interesting that you brought that up. And apparently he was changed, right? His figure was changed over time to not be a dog-headed man anymore. But
right, supposedly he was transformed after performing his first miracle.
Oh, okay. So yeah, to me that would seem like a very, very, very true story, because in the Christian faith, the last thing they would want to do is have a saint as some kind of blasphemous, abominational creature.
Correct.
In that religion, that would be a Nephilim or something like that. Something
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So for them to say that he was a saint means to me that he probably looked like that. in my opinion.
Yeah, it could have been. And what's the correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there a legend that Genghis Khan was from a female woman, earth woman, and the father was a yellow being but when he moved he looked like a dog?
I'm not familiar with that one, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, we've got lore on these type creatures going back to, our earliest recorded histories.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now, what do because I read it that in India that they traded foods and shields and spears and all this stuff with these dog people. Have you researched that? I mean, in the Hindu myth. Well, I don't want to call it mythos because it could be some truth in it too.
Well, supposedly even today in some of the mountains of northern India, you're supposedly still be able to encounter these things. There are places that they consider off limits, sacred areas that they warn people to stay away from, where supposedly these things still are today. I've never been to India, but I would love to go there and see if I could find one of these valleys.
Yeah, that'd be one heck of a find. I was looking at a short film. Are you familiar with the Gable film?
Not off the top of my head. I may know it under. I may know the video itself, but I'm not. The name's not drawing a memory.
Yeah, it I don't know. It looks to be like 1970s, like maybe 8mm, and it shows something charging them, and it doesn't move like a human. It's wolf-like, and
you know which video you're talking about.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That is a pretty intense video. Although if it's the one I'm thinking of, I think the guy that made the video came forward and said it was done as a joke.
Wow.
After he probably got pressured by everything private sector.
Probably.
So when you're writing your books, how much do you allow your imagination to run on these?
Well, some of it is just made up story. But like I said, I've been taking encounter stories and investigating cryptids since the late 70s. So a great deal of not only personal research, but accounts where I've spoken to people who've had eyewitness encounters, my own personal experiences out doing field research. I take these behaviors that have both been observed by others and have been written in written accounts, and I use these behaviors to base the behaviors of the creatures in the books. So while the books themselves are fiction, the behaviors of the creatures and things like that are based solidly in reality.
Absolutely. So there is some facts in there when you're writing this. That's what makes the book so great. Now, are you still in law enforcement? Or are you retired?
I'm retired now.
You're retired now. So you have a pretty good, you can gauge these things. You understand how to investigate when people come to you and say, hey, well, I've seen this, I've seen that. So, the mannerisms, the eye twitches, the body language, all this stuff. They're telling the truth if you're meeting with them, face to face, right?
Absolutely. It's why when I try to take an account, I try to take it in either in person or in video if possible, so I can observe the body language. In some cases, that's just not possible because you're reading second and third hand accounts. But even when I'm out in the field, I approach every field investigation the same way I would of a crime scene. If you're going to collect evidence, you got to make sure you're gloved up. You don't contaminate the evidence. I use that same discipline I learned in the police academy for forensic analysis of data we find in the field.
Right. So with that being said, when you were working in law enforcement, was this some sort of like a vacation away from it, just to dive into another world, another realm?
Well, I've always been a big passionate person about researching cryptids. But when I was active law enforcement, I had to kind of keep that quiet because if a defense attorney gets word that you're a paranormal or cryptid investigator, they will tear you apart on the witness stand. So while I was a cop, I kept it pretty quiet. But when I would go to training seminars or go to other departments to do training, I would always find one or two officers that we would kind of strike up a conversation. And I collected some really good stories from cops who don't want their names mentioned, but
Right.
cops who had very real and very
wow.
terrifying experiences.
Can you tell us one of these ones?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I would
One of
love
my
to hear one of
favorites.
these.
Let's go.
Yeah,
One
let's
of my
go.
One of my favorites was told to me by an officer I met at a training seminar in northern Arkansas, and him and I got to talking about it, and he talking about Bigfoot, and he said, "Well, he says I'm going to tell you a story, but you have to never ever mention my name associated with him." I absolutely. He said, "All right, one morning I went out deer hunting, and I got out to my deer stand, and he said my deer stand was between 12 and 15 feet off the ground. He said I was pretty high up in an oak." And he said, I knew I was going to doze off because I was out there way early. He said, so had one of these soft-sided cooler lunch boxes. So I loop it around my leg and I dozed off. He said, I woke up and felt something tugging on that lunchbox. And I looked down and this Bigfoot's head was level with my knee and it was trying to take my lunchbox. I said, what'd you do? He said, I gave it the lunchbox.
Wow.
I said, what'd you do after that? He goes, well, after I was sure it was gone, I climbed down out of the tree. I went back to my truck and I got the hell out of there. He says, the next day I sold my deer hunting equipment. I haven't been since. He says, if you want that deer stand, I'll tell you where it's at, but I'm not going back out there.
Wow. That's a pretty close encounter story. It was tugging at him. That's like usually people just see him from far away and they're gone.
He said he was absolutely terrified. I said, did it ever, enter your mind to try and get a shot off? He goes, dude, it was literally right by my knee. If I'd have went for the gun, it probably would have killed me.
Does he have any details of what it looked like up close?
He said it was pretty dark out, but since it was so close, he could see its facial features. He said the eyes kind of had almost a jaundiced cast to them, like they were yellowish around where the whites of the eyes would be.
Yeah.
He said it looked very intelligent, had kind of a sloped head like they described. He said, but I really only got a look of about from the neck up to the top of the head. He said it was dark colored hair. He said it looked like it was well groomed, almost like it had combed its hair.
Its hair. Wow. That's interesting.
He says, I locked eyes with it, and he said, I'm surprised I didn't crap myself. He said, but I cut loose that strap, and it turned and walked away.
How tall do you think it was?
Well, he said his knee would have been about 12 feet off the ground.
Wow, that's massive.
Yeah, it was a big beast, and that was down in the Ozark National Forest down in Arkansas.
I would have froze up too. I don't blame him. I don't think the gun would have done anything.
Yeah.
No, he was packing for deer. He said, I don't think anything I had would have put a dent in it.
Yeah. So there's stories that don't people shoot at this thing and it doesn't faze them?
Well, there are a lot of cases where people have reported shooting at one, and you always hear the same thing. I'm a really good shot. I know I hit it.
Right.
But one thing we learned in the police academy is in critical incidents with cops who are trained marksmen to be trained to shoot under fire. When you're receiving gunfire, when you're in a critical incident and your adrenaline drops, even trained officers' marksmanship drops to less than 10%. So if you've just seen this creature that you don't know what the heck it is, I'm going to guess your marksmanship may not be what you thought it was. However, having said that, the David Paulides Missing 411 Hunters series, where he talks about hunters who were armed and went missing in an area, I think those are really compelling because I've talked to a lot of hunters personally who have had experience and had one in their crosshairs and didn't take the shot because they thought it looked too human. Mm-hmm. I think the Missing 411 hunters are the guys that took the shot.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's a broad topic. 411. You got people missing all the time, and also that brings a memory in my head regarding the what's it called? Is it the Highway of Tears in Canada?
Yeah, the Highway of Tears in Canada.
Yeah. What's your opinion on that? These women go missing. That's just really weird.
Well, a good chunk of them could be human trafficking. We can't just dismiss that as a possibility. But some of these girls were walking, and this is a very densely wooded area. It's highly possible that cryptids could have carried them, specifically Bigfoot, because look at all the Native American lore behind Bigfoot creatures coming into camps and carrying off women and children. I don't think we can dismiss that as a possibility. Does it explain all of them? Probably not. I mean, there could be serial killers operating in that area. There could be human trafficking involved. Mm-hmm. But I think being dismissive and just ignoring the possibility of cryptid abductions is kind of being naive.
Yeah, I have to agree with that.
Well, the Native Americans have, tons of stories about giants kidnapping their women all the time. So
Yeah. So with that, some people will say it's a werewolf, while others will say it's a skinwalker. And now that's kind of segueing into the Native American oral traditions. What have you gained on that side regarding the Native American stories regarding this this hybrid, I guess?
Well, there's a big difference between a dogman and a skinwalker. The Navajo refer to the skinwalkers as the Yinadalushi, and they're basically a shaman who went as dark as you possibly could go, like corrupted their soul dark for power. According to the Navajo tradition, a skinwalker can take on any form, from insect to other people. So they're not limited to just this dog form. I personally think that the Dogman does not change form. I think it is locked in that form, and I think because of how far we know this goes back to the Roman and Greek empires, I think that the Dogman may have been a primitive culture's attempt to explain the werewolf legends.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There's many creatures.
So that Dogman, for sure, we agree. Like, it's a race, right? Some kind of ancient.
Well, I definitely think so. Yes.
And along with those, just really quick, as I was researching all this stuff, a lot of these Dogman in the ancient past are always talked about, right, with these creatures called blemmies. Like, you heard about these blemmies? They have like their head is in their chest, and they have like these other creatures with one leg, and they have a big foot, and they hop on one leg. I mean, these are all things written by Christopher Columbus and Alexander, other creatures they saw. You never heard of any of these weird creatures? They're all written together.
I've heard of those, but that is not something that I was really something that I've dug much into.
Right.
I was like, what are these things? But the same thing, they talk about them as if there's a whole, just like the Dogmen, they have their own, culture, their own land, their own customs, how they eat. So the blemmy is like some kind of creature with no head, but the eyes and the mouth and the nose and its chest. And then there's one that has 1 foot with 8 toes, and it just hops on one leg, and they all kind of lived around in that area in India where all those Dogmen were, apparently.
There are some really, really bizarre things in this world, things that we just aren't prepared to explain. And we like to think that we as humans have completely explored this planet and know every rock, plant, and animal, but we really don't. There are areas of the world that probably no human has ever set foot in. If you look at just specifically North America, let's say from Canada and the United States, if you look just at that on Google Maps, and if you look at the satellite view, not the street view, you look at the satellite view, there is massive sections of unbroken green from northern Canada all the way to Texas. So there's plenty of room where these creatures could exist right here in the United States without people ever running into one. I mean, here in Missouri, there are places in the Mark Twain National Forest that probably hasn't seen a human in 50 to 100 years, if then.
Wow. So when you say all that, me and my co-host here, which is my father, of course, we've lived on a very, very haunted, very weird kind of ranch that was on the Indian burial ground. So we've seen some definitely some weird cryptids before. For me personally, I didn't see a Dogman or a werewolf, but I definitely saw some weird cryptids that I cannot explain. So, with that being said, I don't take any of these accounts from anybody, as a joke. If they're being genuine, I would say I believe them until they prove themselves, lying. Because I definitely see some weird stuff before that I can't even explain to this day. So
even if you take an account that's completely outside your own personal experience, like I approach things from a physical evidence standpoint because of my years as a cop.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I'm dismissive of people who've had what they refer to as the woo experiences.
Yeah.
Just because they say they've experienced something I have not doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I mean, I've never been to Niagara Falls, but I believe it exists.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good. My next question is: were you a skeptic before you started delving into this realm?
I've always been kind of open-minded to stuff like this. I grew up on stories my mother told me about her growing up in a haunted house. One of my great aunts was a medium. Very well respected one around the area. Basically, like a hedge witch. People would go to her for remedies and stuff, and she could channel spirits. So I grew up on these stories, and it's something that I've always just been accepting of. And the first time I saw the Patterson Gimlin footage, I was just absolutely hooked. And I talked my mother into buying me all those old Time Life books that had all like the Loch Ness Monster and stuff in it. So really just kind of fueled to that. But my uncle Buddy, his real name was James. He married into my family. He married my mother's sister Violet. He was full blood Cherokee. And one day I was out at his house, and when I say he lived in the sticks, he lived in the middle of nowhere. He lived on 160 acres that was surrounded by 5,000 acres of conservation land, and his nearest neighbor was miles away. The only people that hunted that land was family. And I was out at his house one time as a young man. I was probably 8, maybe 9, and I asked him about Bigfoot creatures, and he waited till we were alone, and he put me on his leg, and he said, I'm going to tell you something. He says, I want you to listen carefully. I said, what's that? He goes, Bigfoot creatures are real, and they're on this land, and you need to be very careful when you're away from the house.
Wow.
And he was not a drinker. I mean, he was a Marine sniper in Korea. I mean, he was a very serious guy. And for him to just tell me that was just mind blowing. And Uncle Buddy was like a second dad to me. I mean, he taught me how to track deer. He taught me how to fish. I mean, I learned so much from him, and just an incredible man to learn from. We lost him a few years back.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. But I had what I know about most Native American lore, I learned from him, and what I learned of hunting, fishing, and tracking, I learned from him. And my two encounters with what I believe were Bigfoot was on his land.
Wow. So you did have an encounter with Bigfoot?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did.
Would you like to talk about it?
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, this is, we can talk about both.
Yeah, I would love to hear about this.
About 15.
Okay.
I was in a deer stand. Got out there early one morning, and was waiting for sunup so I could start hunting. And again, when I say that his nearest neighbor was miles away, the chances of someone finding my deer stand deep in the woods that far from a road, practically impossible. The only other person that knew I was out there was my uncle. And, for me to run into something out there, it had to be him or nothing. Well, I'm up on my deer stand, and I hear something walking up behind my tree, like directly coming up behind the tree, like it knows where I'm at. And it's definitely on 2 legs. And I can hear, step, step, step. And it's getting closer, and I'm starting to think maybe it's my uncle. And I go, hey, who's back there? And I heard this big, deep intake of breath, and then it goes, oh. And then I hear it turn and start walking away. Well, the tree was big enough that I couldn't really scramble around to look around behind the tree. So I had to climb back down on the tree, get my light up and everything. And by the time I got out of the tree, it was gone. But I could see these huge impressions in the leaves where it had walked. So I tell my uncle about that, and he said, yeah. He said, something was coming up behind your deer stand, and I think you know what it was, meaning it was one of the Bigfoot creatures. So a year later, same deer stand, but that I had moved to another part of his land. And there was an area of his land down near the bottoms, down near the river, that he told us to never hunt. He said, don't go down there, stay out of that area. That is an area that's off limits. Don't go down there. It's a bad area. Stay out of there. So I'm in a deer stand, and it's not too far from that section of land, but it's still where I need to be. And I was waiting for a good-sized buck, and I passed on a couple small ones, and finally I got a really good one come out. He was probably about a 12-pointer. Wow. And I was hunting with a British 303 using soft-nosed rounds. So I knew if I hit it, it's going to drop. And I waited for it to step out, and I hit it right in the sweet spot. It dropped immediately. So I start scrambling out of the tree, and it kind of gets shakily to its feet and bounds off. So I go over to start my track from where I'd shot it, and I saw where it had dropped was quite a bit of blood and pieces of lung tissue, or what we refer to as lung butter. And it was heading off kind of toward that area where I wasn't supposed to go. So I'm tracking it, and I'm finding like big splotches of blood. I know this thing's bleeding out quick. I'd gotten it good. It got to a little ravine that was down in a dry creek bed, and it dropped down about 20, 25 feet down into the bottom of this creek bed. And I saw where it had collapsed. It was laying in a pile of leaves, and it was done. It was laying there. But it was too far for me to drop down, so I had to backtrack down this little ravine a little ways to find a spot that I could climb down and go back. And I was gone maybe 15 minutes, maybe, if that. I get back to the spot, I find the bloody spot, the bloody leaves where the deer had collapsed, but it was gone. And there are no grizzly bears in Missouri. It hasn't been in a very, very long time. There wasn't black bears until within the last 20 years. We just didn't have black bears in Missouri. They'd been hunted out. We do have coyotes, but there haven't been any wolves in Missouri. We do have mountain lions, but this had not been dragged off. I was in a dry creek bed. I mean, I would have seen it. There was sand and small rocks. It would have, if something had dragged it off, I would find it. Coyotes, if they'd gotten it, would have eaten it and destroyed it on the spot. A coyote kill is messy. And I wasn't gone long enough for them to have eaten it, let alone completely devour it without a trace. Mountain lion would have dragged it. There's no drag marks. The deer is gone. So I spiral out about 50 yards in every direction that I can possibly go looking for more blood. I don't find another drop. So I get on the radio and I call my uncle. I had a little Motorola radio, and I told him, I said, "Hey, Uncle Buddy, I think somebody's out here on your land." And he goes, "Where are you at?" So I told him. He goes, "You know you're not supposed to be down there, right?" And I said, "Yeah, but I shot a deer, and this is where it came. I couldn't let it go." And he says, "I'm telling you right now, no person took your deer. Don't keep looking for it. Get out of there, or you're going to be missing like the deer." So I went back to the house, and we talked about it. He goes, "Yeah, that's a section of land I don't want you on. If you'd have kept looking for that, you probably wouldn't have come out of there."
Wow. So with that being said, so you believe that these, let's talk about both the Dog Man and Bigfoot. Are these both herbivores and carnivores?
I think Bigfoot are more omnivorous, like bears.
Okay.
But I think dogmen are straight up carnivores. They're predators.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree, because they're always related to these vicious murders. With Bigfoot, there's not really. I mean, at least what I've looked up, and you know more than me, sir, but they're not really associated with really violent stories, are they?
Well, there are quite a few violent Bigfoot encounters.
Oh, there
really
are.
But the thing is there's also just about an equal number of peaceful encounters where people rounded a corner, saw one, they looked at each other and went their own way. Or where in some cases I've read a couple of accounts where a logger had a tree fall on him and a Bigfoot lifted the tree off of him. Or occasionally a child will get lost in the woods and a Bigfoot will bring it home. So you do hear peaceful encounters with Bigfoot, peaceful interactions, but you don't get that with Dogman.
Yeah, I was about to say that, because I don't think there's any stories of Dogman walking a child home at all.
Yeah, people report Dogman as either hellish or demonic. There's no happy stories involving Dogman.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing too, do you think some of these Dogmen could be some kind of a science experiment, maybe some kind of hybrid in a lab?
I don't think that they were created in a lab. Like we're looking at the cynocephalus.
Like no, I'm saying like recently, maybe
way back.
Yeah.
However, if they're out there, our government will certainly try to find a way.
Yeah. I should have said my question better. My question was going to be: do you think a lot of them will be back, but more as like a remake from the government, maybe from older DNA, try to make them stronger, try to make them more vicious?
Or finding them as cubs and trying to find ways to control
soldiers. Them. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I think too.
Wow. Now, getting back to the Native Americans, now they believe the Dogman has some type of supernatural ability. When you looked into this, and if you did, I should phrase that. How did that affect your researching into the Dogman?
Well, it certainly gave me a healthy respect for him. I mean, the Cherokee refer to him as the Ulonga Dog Lala, which basically translates as spirit with knife teeth. Mm-hmm. The Cherokee very much, encourage people to avoid these things. They're not considered a welcoming spirit. They're not considered something you want to run into. They're dangerous. The Lakota associate it with the Shunkawarakan, which was called the dog stealer. The Shunkawarakan would come into camps and steal dogs and kill, and sometimes people. So there's a lot of Native American lore that talk about how dangerous dogmen are. You just don't get stories of them being friends to any tribe. The Choctaw have a legend of Bigfoot and dogmen going to war over resources. So they're definitely not friends.
Wow.
And I think I don't think that's ever going to change, because one, they have a similar diet. They would hunt the same creatures. But at the same time, dogmen would probably prey on Bigfoot if it got a chance.
Wow. That's
I never heard of that. There's a war between the Dogman and the Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
Where's this story from?
It's from the Choctaw.
Choctaw. Yeah, definitely going to note that down. That sounds like a good read.
now with staying on the Native Americans. Have they reported the Dogman? Maybe it has some sort of language, sign language, sound language.
I've heard stories of them, them having a language with each other, but I've never heard of anything that anybody could understand. Basically, it was yips and growls and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they're definitely intelligent. I mean, they're capable of stalking people. They're dangerous predators. And I think if you run into one in the woods, you better hope you can back out of the area, because otherwise you're going to be a missing 411 case.
That's crazy. Are these there? Now I know there's been some accounts where people have pointed a rifle at these things, and they felt like there was some type of telepathic connection telling them to put their arm away. Could that be just them looking at themselves, doing an interpersonal search and saying, I better put my gun down? Or is it something possibly it could be telepathic from the Dogman?
Well, I've heard people refer to like Bigfoot contact, and even with Dogman, a certain limited type of what they refer to as mind speak, which is, I think, is just another word for telepathy. I have never encountered something like that, but I can tell you as a cop, I've gone in to search a couple of buildings, and that primitive, like, lizard part of your brain starts shouting out a warning, like, you might need to back out of here, get some backup before you go in here. And that has never steered me wrong. And it to me, it almost appears as my own voice in my head saying, you are in trouble, back out of here. So I can't say with any degree of certainty that that's what they're experiencing, but that's the only thing remotely close to quote unquote mind speak that I've personally experienced. It's just basically my own brain saying, you're in over your head, you need to back out of here. And I've had that happen to me in the woods too. You get into an area that just goes absolutely dead quiet, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is probably a good time to back out of here and get something a little bigger than a pistol.
Yeah. Even the air changes in the environment. Everything just gets heavy breathing, kind of. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like
the air is almost charged with electricity. You're just like, oh, this is a bad place. I need to get out of here.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit of supernatural stuff going on there.
It's almost really, I think it's more like your body's sixth sense warning you of danger.
That's kind of like when when you're going into an elevator, and you see a group of people that your mind and your body's telling you, let's just skip this elevator with these people in there. I get it. It could be supernatural or just something, something bad's about to happen. It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
I was a corrections officer for a number of years, and I got to the point where I could read a crowd well enough. I could walk into a pod with inmates and know there was going to be a problem that day. You could just feel it.
Oh my God, yeah, that's a horrible feeling. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, hey,
I would look at one of the younger officers and go, "We're going to have problems today." Like, how do you know? I'm like,
sure enough.
Wait.
Yeah,
write it down. It's going to happen.
Jeez. Now, people will say, okay, well, if there's a Dogman, why hasn't anyone turned up a body of the creature?
There have been a number of stories I've talked to people in a couple of cases where they even reported killing one, but it's generally not very long that somebody either claiming to be part of the Department of Conservation or a government agent takes the body. I think these things are being monitored. I think the government knows about them, and I think they've known about them for a long time. And I've got kind of an interesting story if you'd like to hear it.
Sure.
It's my tinfoil hat theory that kind of runs a little bit down the rabbit hole. But if you want to follow me down this rabbit hole,
hey, rabbit holes are good.
This is why this podcast started, is because I got into too many rabbit holes.
Well, I think you can chase down the rabbit hole with me.
Okay, let's go.
One of the earliest reported violent encounters with a Bigfoot is known as the Bauman incident. It was where a trapper was killed by a Bigfoot.
Wow.
And his partner Bauman fled the area. This story was first recorded in Teddy Roosevelt's book, The Wilderness Hunter. You can still find that book on Amazon. You can still buy the book and read it today. Teddy Roosevelt was a well-known outdoorsman. He recorded this story in his book, The Wilderness Hunter. The book's called the story's called the Bauman incident, but the level of detail in that story is way better than any amount of detail I've ever dragged out of a hunter. I mean, they'll tell you where it was and what spot on the river they were at, but they won't tell you what types of trees they were there, what kind of traps they were using. The level of detail that Bauman conveys in this story leads me to think, and I've got a lot of people that agree with me, that it is highly likely Bauman was actually Teddy Roosevelt himself when he was a young man. He still had political aspirations, and he didn't want to go on record as saying he was chased out of the mountains by a monster. So if you can take that as a distinct possibility that Bauman was in fact Teddy Roosevelt, this is where the rabbit hole takes off. Mm-hmm. One of the first things Teddy does when he becomes president of the United States, he creates the National Park Service and cordons off millions upon millions of acres that we still don't have full access to today.
Wow,
that's actually a very
that mimics Abraham Lincoln's speech.
Yeah, I was about to say about the giants
regarding the extinct giant races in America. So we have two presidents,
and there's another president too that I forgot which one it was, where he went to go meet aliens and.
Eisenhower.
And Paul. I mean, there's always some kind of weird, some kind of entity connection, or with these presidents. There's always a good story with these presidents.
Well,
I firmly believe that the U.S. government has known about these creatures since at least the time of Teddy Roosevelt, possibly even before. And I think that's part of why the National Park Service was created. But if you look forward, to modern times with the national parks, we'll look at all the missing 411 cases in national park.
And there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings out there, too. A lot of Bigfoot sightings out there. And unexplained murders and disappearances, like you said. Exactly. I never thought about it. That's a good rabbit hole right there.
Missing 411 cases that always find the most compelling are the ones where they brought in tracking dogs and the dogs refused to track. In my law enforcement career, I've worked with dogs. I've worked with dogs quite a few times. I was never a dog handler, but I've worked in the field with dogs. For a tracking dog to refuse to track is unheard of. Those dogs live to track. They can't wait to get on the track. For those dogs to lay down and go, nope, I'm out, that is just absolutely mind-blowing to me.
Wow. For a dog, dog sense. They know what's going on for sure. Now, I was in this researching here on the Dog Man and Bigfoot, and this is your book, The Lakeview Man. Mm-hmm. Now, the Bigfoot seemed to be on the West Coast more nonchalant, like leave us alone. While the stories in the bayou in Florida, they're smaller and much more aggressive. And then as you head northeast of the country, they seem to be even a little bit more aggressive. They seem to be more vocal and they disappear. Do you believe there's variations of Bigfoot or just a product of the environment?
I think that there are regional differences, much like if you look at black bears.
Right.
Black bears is a great example. If you take a black bear from the West Coast and a black bear from the East Coast, they're both black bears, but they're very different. You look at them, you can easily tell them apart just by looking at them. Same with the black bears from here in the Midwest. Black bears have regional variances that are different from either East or West Coast. I think the same thing applies to Sasquatch. I think they have regional adaptations. And some of them, especially the ones from colder climates and mountainous areas, are far more aggressive than their lowland counterparts. Ones in the lowlands have got basically a food staple all year round. They can find berries and herbs, and a lot of Bigfoot stories around berry patches. They can find roots and small animals. But you get up in the mountains in those harsh winters, all they're going to have to eat is meat. And I think that accounts for the bigger stories of the Bigfoot getting bigger. I think it also accounts for them being far more aggressive.
Wow, good explanation. Now,
you look at bears as an example, not just black bears, but you get black bears down here in the lower 48 and the lower half of the United States, and they're mostly docile. I mean, you can chase one off just by going, making a loud noise. And they eat primarily, roots and berries, and they will eat meat. And it's rare, but they have been known to attack people. It's rare. Generally, you got to get in between them and a cub or something like that. You get a little farther north, you start running into grizzly bears. Grizzly bears are a lot more aggressive. They eat a lot more meat than their black bear counterparts. Grizzly bears have a notorious reputation for attacking people. Once in a while, hikers go missing and grizzly bears have eaten them. You get even farther north into the polar bears, they're much bigger, they're far more aggressive, and their entire diet is meat. They eat fish, they eat seals, they eat slow Eskimos. I mean, anything they can get, they're going to eat it. And they are confirmed man-eaters.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it makes sense because in colder environments, they need more calories intake to survive as opposed to, a warmer climate. Yeah, that's an interesting take on that.
I think that's a great identifier to take these stories with Bigfoot, because you notice the majority, I'm not saying all, but the majority of aggressive Bigfoot encounters come from colder states, especially Alaska. The Alaskan hairy man stories, those things are constantly aggressive.
Hey, right. Alaska, wasn't there a town that was abandoned because of Bigfoot?
Yeah, Port Chatham, Alaska had a thriving cannery because of the fertile fishing grounds there, and it was abandoned almost overnight in about 1945, somewhere around there, right around in World War II. Had a post office and everything, and they abandoned this town because people would go into the woods to hunt, and either pieces of them would float down the river or they would just never be seen again. And then a lot of the cannery workers quit and refused to work there because of these Bigfoot creatures coming into town.
So how were these hunters found that, there's no way it could have been done by a bear? Did you do any research on that?
Some of them were found missing body parts. Some of them would be found and their rifles would be snapped.
Wow.
Bears don't do that. If I remember correctly, there was one story where they found they didn't find the body of the guy, but they found his head stuck on a tree branch.
Whoa.
Again, not something a bear would do.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's definitely like some kind of warning or a sign. Like, look at, this is what I can do, and you're going to be next if you don't stay out of my area, right? It's like kind of like a territorial thing. It seems like
these Bigfoot. Did they leave any signs to stay out, like any stick figures or any bark missing or scratches, or similar to like a bear would do?
Well, a lot of people report encountering tree structures or rock formations in the woods. But to me, one of the best territorial indicators of aggressive Sasquatch are the reports that you get of trees that have been snapped off around the 8 to 10 foot mark, ripped out of the ground, and then shoved back into the ground with the root wad in the air.
That's crazy.
There's a lot of researchers finding them. There's even a couple of researchers found some of those here in the Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri.
Yeah, I heard stories about the giant mountain man in that area. This could be also, the Bigfoot phenomenon.
Well, if you look back in the 1800s, and you can find these all over the internet, there are lots of stories from old newspapers from like the late late 1800s, where they would say wild man of the woods attacks farmer, or hairy man attacks travelers. And because they didn't call it Bigfoot back then, because nobody ever heard the phrase. Bigfoot wasn't coined until Jerry Crews and his logging crew were discovering large footprints in the late 50s up in Northern California. So that's when the term Bigfoot came about. But before then, it was either wild man or hairy man or, forest man, things like that. And of course, if you look at the Native American lore, they all describe the same type creature, sometimes aggressively, sometimes not. But every tribe's got their own name for it. There's 100 different tribes got 100 different names for the same creature.
Wow. Now, what are your thoughts on I think it's David Pilates? Pilates, he states that Bigfoot hunts people. Is that correct?
I think in some cases it does. I think that explains part of the missing 411 cases. I don't think it explains them all. But if you look at the missing 411 cases, he's not picking the ones where someone wandered off the trail and they find him dead from exposure, or they find him with a broken leg and they died in the woods because of an animal attack. He doesn't include those cases at all. He only includes the weird ones that meet certain criteria. And even just the ones that he picks that meet those specific criteria, there's still thousands of those. We have no idea exactly how many people go missing in national parks because the National Park Service has refused to release that information. According to NAM US, 600,000 people are reported missing in the United States each year. Now, granted, a big chunk of those are probably human trafficking, and I can tell you from a cop, being a cop, a lot of times somebody will get reported missing, and a day or two later they'll turn up, and the report gets canceled, but it never gets taken out of the system. It's still reported as a missing person, so that counts toward that 600,000. But a good chunk of those people just go missing, and we never know what happened to them. And that's the documented cases. In cases of homeless persons or undocumented workers that go, if somebody goes missing, by and large, those aren't even going to get reported. If somebody reports a missing homeless person to law enforcement, they're going to say, well, they're an itinerant person. They don't have a permanent address. They might have just left. And it doesn't really get the investigation that it would from anybody else, because you can't say that they're really missing if they don't want to be found and they just moved on to another place. So it's hard to say when a homeless person really went missing. But I think if we really knew the sheer number that are being preyed upon, I think it would be pretty astounding.
For sure.
What do you think about Bigfoot having some kind of interdimensional type of ability? Because I've heard a lot of theories where the Bigfoot kind of just disappears whenever it wants, and the footprints just kind of lead to nowhere. You ever heard about anything like that?
I have heard stories about that, and while I will never say that's completely impossible, I will never be the guy that says these stories, what they refer to as the woo, are impossible. In cases like mind speak, or what they refer to as cloaking, or dimensional portals, I will never dismiss that outright and say it's impossible. We know CERN actually opened a portal in the Super Collider, so portals are a thing. We can't just bury our head in the sand and go, oh no, those don't exist. However, I have not experienced anything like that personally. And a growing number of researchers who have been able to collect hair samples of Bigfoot talk about the clear shaft of the hair, how the hair, the actual core of the hair itself is clear, much like a polar bear's hair. Now that could be very compelling, because if that's true, and even Doug Hychek from Monster Quest, even he reported the clear hair shaft on hair. Now, and we know polar bears aren't naturally white. That's because they're picking up the color around them, and their skin is actually black.
Cloaking. I didn't know.
Yeah, then they say the next generation of ghillie suits are going to have fiber optic fibers in it, because it will absorb the light around it and redirect the colors it's around. If Bigfoot hair is capable of doing that, it could completely explain why they step into the foliage and just seem to disappear. I'm not saying it's impossible that they're cloaking or going through a portal or anything like that, but Occam's razor would say that the most logical explanation is probably the actual explanation. So if their hair is capable of doing that, logic would say they're gathering the color of plants around them or the bushes around them and appearing to turn invisible. And then you've also got accounts of people that say that we were following Bigfoot tracks and they just went to the middle of a field and disappeared. Our special forces operatives are taught how to walk back on their own tracks and then pick another route to throw off pursuit. If something that's born to the woods and knows, is born with basically a natural ghillie suit and doesn't want to be followed, would know these tricks, would be able to do that. And it's not like you can just look at the tracks and go, they disappeared. Only a trained tracker can look at the qualities of these tracks and say, this was actually walking back on it. It was carrying a weight. It was running. You can't just look at a track and if you're not trained in tracking, you're not going to see the little details that trackers will see. You'll just see a footprint and it disappeared. So you would have to study those with an eye for tracking, for people who know what these tracks are saying, because it says more than just a footprint. You can tell by weight distribution how the foot rolled. There's a lot of little cues that'll tell you how this track was made. And I think it's of these cases where the track just disappears in the middle of a field. I think it's backtracking on its tracks and going either up a tree or onto rocks and getting away. And again, Occam's razor would say the most logical explanation is the correct one. And I think it's very difficult to explain a mystery with another mystery. Simply because we don't understand it doesn't mean it's immediately aliens or portals or cloaking. I'm not going to say that's impossible. Again, I'm not going to be the guy that says those are completely impossible. That can't possibly be it. It could possibly be. I just think that we should look for more logical explanations before we start leaping to fantastical ones.
I agree. I agree 100%. What you just told me right now, I learned something very new today. So that was a very good explanation I never knew that. Today I didn't know polar bears weren't white. So I learned that today. And then it made a lot of sense with the cloaking ability with the hair that they have. That makes more exact, like you said, it's a more logical explanation.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I've never heard that, DA, that, the fibers of the hair. I never heard of that. I mean, that's
kind of like predator kind of thing.
Yeah. Maybe they have some kind of.
And that would also explain how some people will say Bigfoot seem to shimmer, because if it's walking through changing light surfaces, the changing amounts of light, that hair is going to refract and change drastically. Wow. I took a report from a guy who lives on the Cherokee Reservation just down here across the Oklahoma border near Miami, Oklahoma. Talked to the guy. He tells me he was walking along a trail near a creek. He was going to one of his favorite fishing spots. Rounds a bend in this corner near this little creek, and there's a Bigfoot standing in the middle of the trail. Wow. He said it wasn't massive. It was like 6.5, 7 feet tall. It just looked at him like, holy crap. And he said, I kind of gave it the same look. He said, but once it realized I saw it, it put its hand up in front of its face like it was blocking its eyes, and it stepped into the trees, into the thick brush, and it disappeared. I said, you mean like it cloaked or went through a portal? He goes, no, it's like it turned green and vanished.
Whoa.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Wow.
That's like the predator, I'm telling you.
It's like some type of chameleon.
He said, I do not for a second think it turned invisible or anything like that. I think it just absorbed the color around it, and I lost it.
That's a trip. I've never heard that from anyone on any Bigfoot podcast.
You see, I opened up a big old can of worms with that question. That's a rabbit hole I just put us all through right now.
And if it's true, I mean, Doug Hychek has got samples of hair that he's talked about on Monster Quest, and he has the Untold Radio Network. He's talked about these hair shafts on there. Some of the researchers I know that work down in Florida on the researching the skunk ape, they've reported the same thing, that it has that clear hair shaft. If this proves to be true, it's revolutionary. It's mind blowing, because it's a natural adaptation for a creature that doesn't want to be found, and it makes perfect sense.
Wow, that's amazing information. I've never heard of that before. Now, do you think another ways of Bigfoot warning people away? Obviously they're heard to throw rocks. What about the stench that people pick up? Do you think that's some kind of hormonal release to just, that stench is so strong just to get people away from that area?
I think it's a pheromone. Okay. It's either a territorial thing or a warning. Mm-hmm. It's been noted in other primates. Chimpanzees and gorillas both have done it. People have. Jane Goodall reported a musky scent whenever the big dominant males would be around in the tribes, in the troops of gorillas. And actually, Jane Goodall actually believes that there's a North American primate. She said she's very open to the possibility that Bigfoot is just a North American primate. So we've got a lot of scientists that are actually coming on board with the notion that this might be more than just a bunch of people reporting seeing monsters in the woods. And I think we're on the verge of a major shakeup in the cryptid world. We've been seeing a lot of what I would like to refer to as soft disclosures from the government. I don't think the government's ever going to just go, boom, here it is. But I think they're doing little things here and there. Like for example, in the UFO field, they've released a lot of UFO footage from cockpits. We're also seeing a lot of trailheads, like up in the Pacific Northwest, that are being marked with official Park Service signage that say, this area is known habitat for Sasquatch. Be on the lookout for certain things. So we're starting to see these little soft disclosures. State of Ohio, the Department of Natural Resources of the state of Ohio, released a 5-part video series on what to do if you encounter a Sasquatch. And when I first heard they were doing that, I thought it was going to be done as a joke or tongue in cheek. Yeah. It's not. It's a very serious set of videos. State of Florida recently passed skunk ape legislation to make it illegal to hunt them. State of Oklahoma recently put out a $3 million bounty on one taken alive. So there are states that are taking this very seriously, and I think we're starting to see these little soft disclosures from the government as well. Again, I don't think they're ever going to just go, okay, here's everything we know, but they have released a lot of stuff that very quietly confirms it. For example, did you guys know that there was an FBI investigation done on the Bluff Creek
No,
Patterson-Gimlin incident?
nope. I never
The
heard of that.
FBI was called in to investigate it. And in 2019, 2017, somewhere, either 2017 or 2019, the FBI actually declassified and released their file. You can find it online. Google FBI Bigfoot report. You can find the entire thing. It's highly redacted. They've covered a lot of information, but if you read the entire thing and get to their final conclusion, the FBI says, while we find sufficient evidence to believe that a creature like this exists, we think it's dead.
They basically admitted it, but at least they admitted
Like
it.
there's only one.
That's the last one on Earth.
Yeah.
The only one of its kind. That's physically impossible. We all know that. For there to be one, even back in the 1960s, there has to be a breeding population.
Yeah, I believe there is.
So the FBI basically just admitted that Bigfoot is real, but they were very, very guarded about how they said it.
Jeez. Wow, I never heard about the FBI getting involved in that. That's excellent information. And in your research, did you come upon, people who may have told you that they were actually hunted or surrounded by Bigfoot?
There's a lot of stories floating around, like the Ape Canyon incident where they shot one and their cabin was attacked. There's the story that's called the Siege of Hanabi, happened in Hanabi, Oklahoma, where a family was having Bigfoot attacking their house, trying to get the deer that they'd been harvesting and putting in their deep freeze. Essentially, it ran them off their land. They ran them off their land, but they got into a gunfight
Wow.
with a Bigfoot that attacked their house. There are lots of violent Bigfoot stories. Again, not all encounters with Bigfoot are violent, but there are plenty of violent stories out there. There's the Port Chatham incident where a town was abandoned. There's a story from Alaska where a guy who had gone hunting, but he was sleeping on his boat anchored off of the shore. And he woke up to his dog barking like crazy, and he got attacked by a Sasquatch that had swam out to his boat.
Whoa.
He managed to drive it off. It killed his dog, and he made it back to port, badly wounded, and was able to tell his story before he died. So there are lots of Bigfoot stories that are very violent. But then there are others that aren't. I think we're going to see once we start able to completely identify a species, we're going to find that there's as wide a personality type among them as there are among people. I mean, we've got people that are serial killers. I mean, why wouldn't that be? A higher primate that's very intelligent. Why wouldn't we see certain members of the species that were just violent? We all know people that are just violent for no reason. Sorry about that.
No.
But at the same time, we also know plenty of stories where people are kind when there was no profit in it for them. People who were just kind-hearted, and I think we're going to see that in these types of creatures as well with Bigfoot creatures. I don't think we're going to see it in Dogman, but you're going to find personalities running the gamut in Bigfoot just like they are in people.
Jeez. In your research, have there been reported of people actually being taken by Bigfoot? Like, maybe for whatever reason, maybe for mating, maybe for food. I'm wondering if you've heard anything like that during your.
There's lots of lore in the Native American cultures about these creatures coming in and stealing people. We've got the Albert Ostman story where he was abducted by one. There are lots of stories of people being abducted by these creatures, and some of these people that live out in remote areas, who's to say if somebody goes missing, what actually did it, because it takes a survivor to tell the story of what happened. Same thing with the missing 411s. Could these be people that are being carried off for either food or other nefarious purposes? Yeah, easily, because we got no way to know. Like, for example, what was it? Back in 2020, I believe it was, a little boy disappeared from his home, and it was in February. It was in North Carolina. Dead of winter, this little 3-year-old kid goes missing from his house. Search is called in. They finally locate the kid. And when they asked the kid what happened, he said he was protected by a big bear that fed him fed him berries, kept him alive for 3 days in the dead of winter. Bears don't do that.
No, not at all.
If the bear had been not hibernating, a bear would have been looking for a food source. So a small child would have been a quick meal. Bears don't behave like that. Of course, the parents of this kid have never let the actual story of what this kid describes come forward. It's been very quietly suppressed. But the thing is a 3-year-old, what really would he have in his wheelhouse to describe a big hairy thing that took care of him? And again, that's not bear behavior. Bears don't do that. For a big hairy bear to protect this kid for 3 days and keep him fed and keep him warm, that is, that's got to be something like a Bigfoot. So we do have kind stories where Bigfoot have helped people back, and we've got lots of other stories where Bigfoot have carried people off never to be seen again.
Wow, so this is something that the government should take seriously. They should maybe assemble a team. Who knows? Maybe they're doing that now. Maybe they've done it, like you said. Maybe they know about these things.
I think they
I've
do.
heard lots of stories where people would have violent encounters, and then military units would show up. And when I heard these stories, I kept hearing persistent stories from different parts of the country where it was a similar thing. A special forces group would show up and go out looking for these things. So that's actually what inspired my book series, the Codename Wild Hunt series. It's about a military unit that hunts dangerous cryptids. And when I released the first one, I got a call from a buddy of mine who's I'm ex-Army, and he's still in the military, and has he's still in this. Let's just say he's in the spec war arena. I won't say which branch he's at. Well, it's just because I don't want to call him out or get him in trouble.
Yeah.
But I got a phone call from him, and he's like, "Hey, buddy, I didn't wish you to let me know about this because you're going to make some folks nervous with this."
Wow. What? Okay, so that book, you wanna kind of summarize it?
The series is called Codename Wild Hunt. I'm writing the 4th book of that series at the moment. It's about a military unit, a special forces unit that goes out anytime people are being attacked and killed by these cryptid type creatures. This is the unit that gets sent in to clean it up.
That's crazy. Wow.
It's like a nighttime cleaning crew. I heard about. There's a lot of military stories like that. People that got out of the military and they're part of this like monster cleaning crew. Kind of like what's that guy's name? He's very famous whistleblower. He said he went underground and saw he went to go dig a hole underground for the military, and they saw a bunch of aliens, and he got zapped. His fingers got zapped off. You know what I'm talking about? And then they ended up killing him.
Was that Bob Lazar?
No. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. I just don't remember his
name.
name.
He said the same. He was very famous for this. He was like a very famous whistleblower, and he ended up being found doing suicide, but his suicide was his arms tied behind his back with the wire tied around his neck. So, he didn't do suicide. But this is a his name is slipping me, but he's very, 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 very well known for this cleanup crew. But anyways, yeah. Sorry about that. Try to find it.
If you think of the name of that guy,
yeah, I'm going to try to find it right now.
I'd love to do that a little bit more.
Yeah, you can look him up. Now, getting back to this, to Bigfoot, in your research, have any witnesses, maybe suggested that they have some sort of language or maybe some type of sound or,
Well, I had the opportunity to interview Ron Moorhead, who recorded the famous Sierra sounds. I had him on my podcast, and Ron's a super nice guy, and he will just absolutely tell you everything he knows. Just one of those really good guys who is not afraid to just lay it on the line. He doesn't care what people think, whether they agree with him or not. This is what happened. He knows the truth, and he's willing to share it. Now, Ron and his friends back in, I think it was 1972, using old audio equipment, were able to record these Bigfoot creatures up in the Sierra Mountains of Colorado, making calls to each other and doing what they thought was a language. It's been modernly referred to as the samurai chatter because it sounds like one of those old samurai movies, like where they're making almost like those old Japanese films, the old samurai films. But anyway, Ron was able to record this entire length of conversation. So he gets a naval cryptolinguist involved and has the sounds analyzed. Well, then the cryptolinguist says, well, I can tell you this is a language. I can't tell you what they're saying, but I can tell you this is a language. And when they put the recordings through an analysis, they determined that the vocal range was both above and below what humans are capable of producing. So that right there tells you that was not something they hoaxed. It's not something that humans were making. These creatures were having a conversation both above and below what our vocal cords are capable of producing. Now, if you can, taking that in mind, that's why I don't do, you see people doing tree knocks or, doing these Bigfoot yells out in the woods. That's why I don't do any of that. Because my voice cannot reproduce what their voice boxes can. So me hollering out, it'd be basically like, a human trying to listen to the London Philharmonic Orchestra with one headphone. You're not going to get the stereo sound. You're only going to get part of that audio track. So whatever noise we're making, they're obviously right off the bat going to know it's not a Bigfoot. So I don't think you're going to ever be able to call one in by making only half a call.
No, that's true. What if someone reproduced or copied the original howling sound from Bigfoot and played it out? What do you think would happen with that?
That has happened. There was a video floating around for a while, and it's disappeared off of the net, and I can't find it. There were some guys who went down to the Mogollon Rim in Arizona, and they had a really good quality speaker system, and they used the Ohio sounds, which you can look those up on YouTube. The Ohio sounds are still, you can still find those, and it's believed to be a Bigfoot call. Well, they blasted this call from the Ohio sound, and at first they got nothing back. But then they blasted it a second time, and they got a response, and it was close, and it was angry. And those guys basically shut it off, jumped in their vehicle, and took off.
Wow.
Probably played the wrong one.
Yeah, whatever the call they got back, it did not sound happy.
Wow, that's interesting.
So, by the way, I did a little research. The guy's name that I was telling you about, the whistleblower that passed away, his name was Philip Snyder. Philip Snyder, yeah, he's definitely well known. It's like a whole story about how I was in the military and that, high level black projects, and they had like this crew where they just go in and just get rid of all the things that go bump in the night. Very interesting, but yeah, just wanted to get that out there so you could go another rabbit hole later on.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem.
So with for you with your background being a police officer, if you went out to track it, what would you be looking for if you decided to do that, or if you have?
What we generally look for is signs of inhabitation of an area. Stick figures are, I think, these stick structures and tree structures, I think those are only to a certain limited amount of use. For one, if it's Bigfoot that's making them at all, we have no idea what it is, what it's trying to say, what it even means. Some of them very easily could be made by people just messing with people out in the woods. Unfortunately, hoaxing goes hand in hand with the cryptozoology world. For every one legitimate piece of evidence you manage to collect, you'll have 8 or 9 people, shooting some video for YouTube that they think's funny with some guy in a cheap suit chasing kids. So unfortunately, hoaxing is a thing. So we have to take that into consideration anytime we go on an investigation. I think some of the best evidence we can collect now is possibly eDNA, fur or scat samples, and tracks. Unfortunately, because of the advent of Photoshop and video shop programs, I don't think any photographic or video evidence is ever going to be accepted as a smoking gun. The Patterson-Gimlin footage just stood the test of time because that video was shot long before any of those programs existed. There was no way to do video manipulation or photo manipulation back then. It was just shot on an old 8mm camera, and it is what it is. Now, if somebody came forward with that kind of footage today, it would be highly suspect because technology has come a long way. Being able to make a suit like that is a lot more technologically possible today than it was back in 1967. They asked some of the best filmmakers in Hollywood at the time about the Patterson-Gimlin footage, and the guy that had just finished completing Planet of the Apes said, by what our technology is right now, there's no way we could make that suit. So the finest special effects artists in Hollywood were saying, I couldn't duplicate this suit in 1967. Today, yeah, they could probably duplicate it. I mean, look for example at trying to think of the name of the movie. Is it Primal Rage?
Mm,
Might be
might be. Look.
about the Oma. Um, the creature effects in that are just fantastic. The monster's terrifying, and that was done with it wasn't CGI. That was a traditional effect. So suit technology is a lot better today than it was, 55 years ago. So again, photographic and video evidence today is going to have to be able to pass a very close scrutiny before it can ever be accepted. Guys like M.K. Davis and Thinker Thunker are doing a really good job tearing some of these videos apart. And I think they're doing a great service to the cryptid community by exposing some of the ones that are obviously hoax. But when I go into an area, I'm looking for track morphology. I'm looking for in the environment that would be conducive to them being there. Is there plenty of water? Because a lot of accounts seem to involve some nearby large body of water, be it a river, a lake, something like that. There has to be a water source. There has to be plenty of game in the area. If you go into an area and the area's been overhunted, you don't see any deer or turkey or anything like that in the area, odds are really good you're not going to find any big predators in the area either. So there's a lot of criteria you have to make sure that the area you're researching actually meets before you can really pour your energies into it. Fortunately, here in Missouri, there's a lot of terrain that meets those criteria.
Right. Yeah. So the backdrop for your books, what location are you using in your imagination for your books for
I
Apex
try
Predator?
to use real settings, especially settings that have had a lot of sightings in them.
Yeah.
Lakeview Man series is set down near Kimberling City, Missouri, where there's a rich history of weird sightings and Bigfoot sightings and just a very rural area where something like this could easily exist.
Yeah.
The Name Wild Hunt series moves around. It's a team that responds pretty much globally to these monster attacks. The Apex Predator series, that is Native Americans that hunt dogmen, and they travel all over the U.S. looking for dangerous creatures. And then the other cryptid series I have is called the Nightmare Hunter, and it's kind of a modern take of the old Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. I
it's
remember
an
that.
reporter that started investigating some of these sightings and then got dragged in over his head when he found out, hey, this isn't just something that was made up. I'm getting dragged into something real. So they're very different series that all deal with cryptids in different ways.
Wow. Yeah, I remember that series. What are your thoughts? Have you heard of the Wild Man, the cannibal?
There are lots of cannibal stories of wild men. I mean, if you look at place names across the country, if you look at the old plat maps, you'll see all kinds of places like, Wild Man Creek or Devil Hollow or things like that. And I think these places have this kind of name for a reason. I don't think somebody looked at a beautiful spring and went, you know what, this is a beautiful spring-fed area. I'm going to call it Demon Creek.
What do you think?
Yeah, there's got to be a reason for that.
Yeah.
But if you look back, there's a place in Tennessee called Werewolf Springs.
Wow.
And it got that name because the guy that the landowner that used to own the land in that area was attacked by a wolf creature who attacked his horse and buggy with him and one of his farmhands. And they both dove out and ran in opposite directions. And the guy hid, and he could hear in the distance this wolf creature killing his farmhand. So that area became known as Werewolf Springs. If you look at the Land Between the Lakes area, there's a lot of history of Dogman attacks and missing people in that Land Between the Lakes recreation area. But sightings in that area actually go back to long before it was known as Land Between the Lakes. It's only been known as Land Between the Lakes since the early 60s, when the Tennessee Valley Authority put dams on those two rivers and created those two massive lakes. So before then, it was known as the Land Between the Rivers. The local natives said it was a cursed area, that there was dark magic there. And the earliest known Dogman sightings, although they didn't call them Dogmen at the time, but the earliest known Dogman-type creature sightings in that area date back to the late 1600s with French trappers going through the area. And they referred to it as the loup-garou, which was French for werewolf.
Yeah, there you go.
So you've got tons of lore of these creatures being violent toward people, dating back centuries. And yes, these things definitely do take people. And I think for the government to deny the existence of these creatures is a grave disservice to people, because people should be warned of what they could be facing when they go camping or hunting or hiking out in the woods. They could become a missing 411 case.
Yeah, true. How many, in your research, how many different types of Dog Man and Bigfoot do you believe are out there? Because, I mean, there's got to be more than just, I'm sure they're not clones. I mean, they got to be described in different, various sizes from, some report, 10 foot, some 6 foot, Dog Man, same thing.
Some researchers believe there's as many as 10 different types of Bigfoot creatures on the North American continent, and as many as 7 types of dogmen.
Wow.
But I've looked at the types of dogmen, and I think 3 of those are misidentified creature called a Bigfoot type creature called a gugway. So I think there's really only about 4 types of dogmen and maybe as many as 6 types of Bigfoot.
Wow. And your witnesses, when you did your research on Bigfoot, how do they describe it? I mean, did they see like any facial features? What's the height of it? I know you spoke on the hair color, but are there various hair colors, like maybe reddish, dark brown, or just plain black, etc.?
Bigfoot have been reported being from everything from white to like an auburn brown to dark brown to black, and sometimes anything in between. But like a reddish brown. But most commonly, Bigfoot are reported as being dark brown or black. Occasionally, you get the reddish brown reports. Once in a while, you'll get a white one reports. And dogmen seem to be reported being mostly the colors you see in wolves, anything ranging from light gray all the way up through dark black.
Oh, that's a scary thought. What's the tallest Bigfoot you've researched or heard of?
I've been told accounts from people that reported them all the way up to like 15 feet tall.
Wow.
And I think that is probably adrenaline. I really do.
Yeah.
Like for example, if you were walking down the street and the guy from Game of Thrones, the Mountain, walked up and punched you and knocked you on your back.
Yeah.
You look at that guy, you're going to think he's 8-9 feet tall. He's really only about 6'10", but he is a massive dude.
Yes.
But looking up from the ground, you're going to think this guy is 8-9 feet tall and 12 feet across. Adrenaline will do that to you. I know that from taking burglary reports and robbery reports. You interview 5 different witnesses to a violent crime, and you're going to get 5 different stories. You'll get if the guy, if the suspect is 5'5", you're going to get everything from 4 foot tall all the way up to 6'2". I mean, people will interpret the data in different ways when under stress. So you've got to sift through these and kind of, is this possible? Was it possibly this, that kind of thing. So you've got to listen to the details and kind of extrapolate and learn to know when they might be exaggerating or they might just been scared. So I think while it is possible that, especially in some of the remote places like Alaska, that Bigfoot might get into the 15-foot range, but I think it's probably more likely that it's consistently 7 to 8 feet, like most people report. Whereas dogmen seem to be a little smaller. Once in a while, you'll get a story of a big dogman being in the 8 to 9 foot range. But for the most part, the average seems to be about 6.5, 7 feet tall for dogmen.
That's still pretty big.
The one I saw in LBL was about 6.5, 7 feet tall.
That's monsters, and I'm pretty sure aren't they more robust? They're more muscular too, right? They're just
pretty heavily muscled. But then again, they kind of expect that among canines. I mean, I owned an English Mastiff, and never have I owned a more lazy dog. That dog was not physically active. His biggest attack was attacking a nap. He was not a physically active dog, but when he was up and walking around, that dog was freaking jacked. I mean, the muscles on his legs were just massive. And he wasn't like at the gym 24/7 pressing weights. He was just a lazy, big, goofy dog. And that seems to be fairly common among canines. The dog I have now is a pit bull mix, and he is
those things are always yacked. Yeah, those things are always buff too.
He's wicked jacked, but he's also a very lazy dog.
Do you believe that these Bigfoot, do you believe they're cave dwellers?
It's funny you should mention that. If you take a look at the missing 411 clusters map,
Right.
David Paulides has a map he released that has the parks that have the largest concentration of disappearances, which he calls clusters. If you look at the missing 411 clusters map and put that side by side with a map of U.S. cave systems, they correspond almost identically.
Wow. I didn't know that. I learned something new
I
today.
think
Wow.
both Bigfoot and Dogman use the cave systems not only as shelter, but like in the case of the Mammoth Cave system, we believe basically runs from Tennessee to Maine. We don't know how deep it goes. We know there are miles upon miles of caverns down there, and we've only explored a fraction of it. It is much more difficult to explore a cave system than it is to explore, say, a rainforest.
No.
That's true. Now, how far back in your research was Bigfoot first identified? We discussed the Dogman back to the days of Marco Polo and possibly Egypt. How far back in your research does Bigfoot go?
Well, Native Americans were talking about encounters with these type of creatures since before European settlers were on this continent.
Okay.
In fact, the Viking first settlement in the New World was Vinland, and if you look at Leif Erikson's writings on that, they talk about encountering Skraelings, which the Vikings described as being huge and hair covered. That's not a Native American tribe that we know. Shortly after the disappearance of the Roanoke colony, John Smith reported that Native Americans had introduced him to a tribe they called the Susquehannock, and he described them as being giants.
Wow. Okay, gotcha.
And if you go back even farther than that, you've got the ancient lore going back to antiquity of the Yeti, the Yeren, the Yowie, the Alma, the Almasti. There are places all over the world reporting creatures like this. Another great example is the Grey Man of Scotland. On Cairn up in the Scottish Highlands, they've been reporting a gray ape-like creature that's been stalking hikers and backpackers for hundreds of years. The epic poem Beowulf. If you look at the description of Grendel, it's a very close description to a modern Sasquatch. What the ancient Europeans used to refer to as a woodwose. So we've got lore on hairy hominid type creatures that were larger than men, dating back hundreds and thousands of years. So we've got lore on these going way back. It's nothing new, nothing that was recent. As people say, Bigfoot wasn't made up until 1967 with the Patterson-Gimlin footage. That's not true at all. I mean, we've got Native American lore and European lore going back for centuries.
Yeah, that's good. And the reason why I asked about the if you believe they're cave dwellers, because when you go back sometime, maybe 2000 BC, you see in the Hebrew book they talk about the Horites, the giants. These were Nephilim. They were called the Raphaim. So these were the offspring of the you want to call them aliens, sons of God, Anunnaki, whatever. That was a mixture of human and these star gods. So these Horites are understood as being cave dwellers, and they were described as hairy. And this goes back way back. So there's a connection between what you're talking about and what the Hebrew book discusses regarding not only the Horites, but there were the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Gergesites, the Jebusites. There are many tribes of these giant things. And when I brought up Abraham Lincoln's speech, he talks about that extinct race of giants that fill the mountains of Ohio and America. So we know there was some sort of giants. Bigfoot is one, obviously. And, so there's a great connection there. In my opinion, I do believe that Bigfoot does exist.
I do as well.
And, so also the Dogman, I some people, like I say, you can't just write it off. People have experienced these things. I've experienced supernatural things, not Bigfoot or Dogman, but other things that made me know that, to understand that there is another world out there. There's another realm out there that sometimes we get to, take a little glimpse into it, and it's not, it's nothing to be joyful over, because it's a scary experience.
It can be downright terrifying. And I think when you're investigating cryptids or you're investigating paranormal, I think both of those fields, once you've opened that crack in your mind where you're where you're starting to accept that these things are real, when you've made that mental connection where you believe they're real, I think you're opening yourself up to more experiences, because, and it's not that you're like attracting more experiences. I think you're just becoming more aware of them being around you. Like, for example, if you spend a lot of time in the woods, I know guys that have spent years in the woods and say, I've never seen a Bigfoot, it couldn't possibly exist.
Right.
Yet these same guys, when they have an experience of their own, become diehard believers. And at that point, they're like, I've been seeing signs of these things for years and just blew it off. I just didn't know what I was looking at. Once you've had an experience, once you've opened yourself up, once that door in your mind is open, you start being aware of more things going on around you than you previously realized.
Yeah. And, my big worry is there some people out there that promote Bigfoot as, some sort of joyful, some kind of man, hairy man, and they make it out like, something sensational. Maybe you should go look for it, go shake hands with it. And that's something that it's dangerous. It's dangerous to look at something unknown and treat it on that type of level that you want to go look for it and you want to talk to it and communicate with it. I think people need to be more knowledgeable and how we spread this type of information. I just want to put a warning out there to people listening to this podcast. Don't go looking for Bigfoot. Don't go looking for Dogman. It is dangerous. DA, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot and Dogman? Do you believe that these are very dangerous creatures?
Oh, definitely. Any wild animal can be dangerous. Even domestic dogs can be dangerous if they're not treated with respect. People that are unfamiliar with a dog shouldn't just walk up and immediately try to start petting that dog, because it might be the friendliest dog in the world, but if it doesn't know you and it feels threatened, it might bite you. Same thing with wild animals. You might have a peaceful encounter with wild animals dozens upon dozens of times, but you catch one in a bad mood, you catch one sick, or you catch it hungry, and it's a whole different encounter. A grizzly bear. 9 times out of 10, if you see a grizzly bear in the wild, it's probably going to just look at you and go its own way, unless you're trying to hunt it, in which case you probably pissed it off. But you can see wild animals in the wild all the time and have a perfectly fine encounter and not be threatened. But you get between a bear and its cub, or you get near a bear when it's close to hibernation series and it's starving, and it has to put on that weight to survive the winter, it's going to be a whole different thing. I mean, they can and will kill you. They can and will eat you. Same thing with cryptids. You've got to approach everything like this with a great deal of respect. They aren't the kind, gentle, forest giant buddies of ours like they portrayed in Harry and the Hendersons. Yeah, you might have a peaceful encounter with one, but you approach the wrong one, and you're a missing 411 case. I would not approach any Dogman, and not expect it to go badly. If you do encounter one, I would highly recommend that you back away slowly. Don't make eye contact. If you run from this, it's going to have a predator response. It's the same thing if you turn and run from wolves, or if you turn and run from a mountain lion. They're hardwired to pursue. They'll hunt you down and they'll hurt you. So you've got to approach these things with a very, very large amount of respect. Remember, it is a wild animal. Just because somebody on a podcast somewhere says they're your friend and you should go up and give one a hug, don't try that. It's going to get you killed. I mean, even hugging a dog you don't know will get you bit. So you just got to be very careful. And if you're going to go out there hunting, fishing, camping, backpacking, exploring, whatever you're going to do, cryptid hunting, if you're going to do something, do it safely. Have a plan. If you're going to go out in the woods, have a plan. Tell somebody who's not going with you where you're going to go and when you're supposed to be back. That way, if you don't show up on time, somebody knows when to start looking for you and where. Take a basic med kit. Learn how to use it. Take a tourniquet, for God's sake. Learn how to use one. because minor injuries, when you're off the beaten path away from 911 services, minor injuries can be fatal. You roll an ankle 5 miles back in the woods, you might not be coming out of the woods.
Definitely.
Take something to defend yourself. If you don't believe in firearms, and I'm not saying you have to,
right?
I do.
Take a hatchet, take a knife. I take all of the above.
You're not going to catch me lacking. You're not going to catch me in the woods lacking without one of those firearms, because I've seen a lot of videos where even mountain lions are stalking somebody, and the guy's just without that pistol there, he probably would have been a nice little meal for them.
Oh yeah, there are things out there that can and will eat you. You know, bears, wolves, mountain lions, snakes. There are things out there that can and will hurt you. And you know, that's completely, ignoring the greater North American meth head. You can walk up with a chest full of buckshot.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
There are people out there just as dangerous as the animals.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, especially the meth heads.
Thank you so much, Mr. D.A. Roberts. I learned a lot today. I really appreciate you coming on. I'm sorry about that. We're at the end of the hour, so really quick, just go ahead and give us all your information where we could find you, follow you, buy your books, all that good stuff.
Awesome, thank you. You can find all of my books on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or wherever books are sold, or you can find them specifically at daroberts.net. You can find me every Wednesday and Saturday night at 8 p.m. Central Time on my podcast, which is called DAX Machina. It broadcasts live to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find all of my books at daroberts.net, but on all social media, you can find me at DARobertsAuthor.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody enjoyed this show and learned something new. Thank you again for listening to the Sabbath at Midnight. I am your host, Lionel Tavares, co-host right here, Dominic Tavares. Thank you, everybody, for listening. God bless, and have a good night.